You are listening to the Become a Guitarist Today podcast with Adam Roach.
Hey there, and welcome to episode number 164 with my guest today, Ben Hutcherson from the band Khemmis. So in today's podcast, we talk all about the new album called Deceiver, which is out right now. So the opening track you're hearing is from the new album, so make sure you check out the show notes where you can find all the links to get the album as well. And while you're there, make sure you check out all my other links for my sponsors, which include Custom Guitar Picks, Musician, and Arnaud Krakowka.
You don't need a drummer to make an amazing metal song. All you need is access to tracks produced in a great studio by a great engineer. My full-length drum tracks are crafted using the best sounding samples I've been developing for over a decade and have been used by thousands of professional musicians worldwide up to the highest level in the industry, including John 5 and Gus G. Stop wasting hours of your time trying to program drums and stop wasting tons of money to have your drummer record in a studio for mediocre results. With my drum tracks, you don't need to worry about any of that. Just drag and drop your tracks, press record, and you're done. All of that with a killer, authentic sound. So go to my website, arnaudkrakowka.com, to start rocking.
So let's go over to the interview now with Ben Hutcherson.
Adam.
Hello. How are you?
I'm doing all right, man.
Thanks for doing this.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, how are you doing?
Yeah, excellent. Just kicking back on this Friday morning here.
Yeah, right on. It's always wild to me. So because we're doing press with so many people from different parts of the world,
Yep.
like the guy I just got done talking to is in New Zealand. So,
Okay.
that makes sense given your time. But like yesterday or a day before or 100 years ago, I don't know how time works anymore. I had an interview with a guy that was in Vancouver, British Columbia, and then a guy that was in Brazil, and then a lady that was in Eastern Germany. And my sense of time was just fucking wrecked after that. Because they were saying, like, good afternoon, good morning, good evening. I'm like, what's happening? And then I go downstairs, I'm like, it's lunchtime. What's happening right now?
So whereabouts are you?
I'm in Denver.
So
It's 5 p.m.
Okay.
I'd say the end of the workday, but, like, I'm a musician, so, like, the workday kind of never ends.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like the workday's over when I'm asleep, and even then, not necessarily.
Yeah. Yeah, so congratulations with the album too. It's fantastic.
Hey, thank you so much, my friend. I really appreciate it.
Yeah.
It feels really good to be talking about it. It feels really good for it to come out. There's something kind of surreal about finishing an album in March or April, whenever we finished it. And then, to have it come out 8 months later, and it's like, oh, yeah, we did do all that, didn't we?
Yeah, that's right. You got to try to remember what you did.
One of the things that was different with writing this album is Phil and I taught ourselves to use Guitar Pro.
I was going to ask about that, yeah. I heard you talk about it.
It's funny. I jokingly say that, Phil and I are Luddites, and, like, that's not true, like, at all. But there's something about Guitar Pro. Well, I won't say it's not true at all, but it's by and large not true. It's true in so much as, you get to a point in your life where, like, you stop trying to keep up with whatever the newest bit of tech is, unless it's guitar gear, then I'm always right there.
Yep.
But I associate Guitar Pro with, first and foremost, Necrophagist. And I love Necrophagist, but Tech Death couldn't be farther away from what we do in Khemmis, both in execution and in the sort of, like, ethos of what it is. And so in my head, I was always like, it's too, I don't know, inhuman, it's too robotic, it's too precise, whatever. But because we literally could not be in the same place, we had to figure something out. We tried jamming over, like, Zoom and Skype, and, like, oh my God, that didn't work. The latency was so bad. I mean, it was a mess. So we started using Guitar Pro, and one of the unexpected but absolutely fantastic sort of outcomes of that is that here we are, 8 months removed from recording the album. We're starting to put together, sets to go play live. And relearning these songs is a lot easier when you've literally tabbed out every single part.
Yep.
And, there's nothing more frustrating than forgetting how something goes, especially if you haven't even recorded it properly yet. But even, from like older albums, anytime we want to play something off, say like Absolution, that we don't ever play live, there's a lot of like sitting down, putting headphones on and like pulling one ear off and what were we doing, and trying to parse through the really fuzzy tone.
Yeah.
So having this sort of documented history of how every single layer goes on the album has made getting the songs together for rehearsal so much less stressful.
Yeah.
I mean, it's still a matter of remembering how to play it, but at least you know how it's supposed to go, and you don't have to spend all that time like, was I on the 10th fret or did I bend up? What was I doing here? So that's been nice.
Yeah. So, I mean, I used to use Guitar Pro a long time ago, but do they have the facility now where you can actually play into it and it tabs out itself, or you do have to tab it out?
I tab it all out.
Okay.
I think it has some sort of audio to MIDI function, but I mean, like any kind of audio to MIDI stuff, it's so imperfect that I can do it by hand. I mean, the same is true when it comes to recording. The idea of like using a plugin that's going to take like drum hits and turn them into MIDI hits, it's always going to be off by enough samples that it's going to be out of phase. Like, I'll just draw those hits in by hand, until they get that technology really good, at which point it might turn into the Terminator. So, I don't know that I'm like really dying for the tech to get that good. So, there is certainly that sort of, I guess, like internal transcription process where you've got a guitar and you're like, all right, 5th fret, type 5. What's the chord? What am I playing? Okay, it's this.
Yeah. But
the flip side of it is being able to see the song as a composition, like quite literally see it. For me, and actually Phil and I were talking about this just the other day, he likes this as well, that it gives you this sort of bird's eye perspective that we never really had before, that you can hear, the demo, or, we do full pre-production before we go into the studio proper. So even when we have, done that first basic recording the album, you don't have the same sort of analytic ability that you do when you are literally seeing the notes in front of you.
Yeah.
And there's something about that visual information, I think, that's useful for not only like understanding what you're doing, but also just for figuring out like, this part might be too busy. Like my eyes are just telling me there's too much happening here. Or maybe my eyes are telling me what my ears were telling me before, getting that sort of confirmation thing. And also being able to craft things, I guess, in a more intentional fashion when it comes to adding layers. So instead of saying, I think I could put a layer here, I will build that layer out, that clean guitar layer. Does it suck? Then I'll just take it out. And we didn't have to waste time in the studio. Especially when we're doing stuff on acoustics, because our electrics are tuned down 2 whole steps and then the low string is dropped. So it's a drop D variant down 2 whole steps.
Oh, wow.
I'm not going to tune an acoustic down to a low A sharp. That would be, unintelligible.
Yeah.
So our acoustics are always down a half step.
Okay.
And just being able to quickly, sort of say, all right, well, this is how I would play it on a clean electric. I can just drag it over to the track for the differently tuned acoustic, and it's going to modify the fingerings for me. And it's going to save me minutes or hours or days of trying to figure out not only where my hands could go, but also like, oh, that chord voicing is really painful. Let me just alternate, this. Let me just move it to a different register. And it's such a much more efficient way of getting through those early stages of pulling material together and getting it sort of ready to feed into the proverbial Khemmis machine.
Mm. And so do you write out both parts, like the harmony lines and everything, when you do yours?
It depends. I mean, if one of us hears a harmony with something we're writing, then yeah. This time around we would write it out. There were also times where, one of us wrote a riff and said, I think there should be a harmony, but I can't figure out what it is because a straight harmony doesn't work. For instance, the sort of instrumental final chorus in Shroud of Lethe has this harmony. Well, it starts off with just this sort of lead line that Phil's playing, and then it splits into 2 harmony guitars. but we could not figure out what the harmony needed to be, because a straight harmony sounded bad, sort of like a diatonic harmony, but playing in like straight fourths or fifths sounded bad. It was like we were just losing our minds. But because we had it in Guitar Pro, what we could do is literally go note by note and say, that sounds good. Nope, that should be unison. Nope, that just needs to be a fourth, I guess.
Okay.
And it made it a lot less, I think stressful. And it also made for this kind of cool sense of being a composer in a way that doesn't normally happen when you're in a rock band.
Yes.
And I'm sure that anyone that is a classically trained composer would roll their eyes so hard it went into the back of their skull. But it really is a matter of learning how to work with multiple instruments, occupying different parts of the sonic spectrum, applying different tonalities. In our case, using effects or amps or whatever. But there is, or at least there can be, this compositional dimension to it that we had just never experienced before, and that I personally found very satisfying, that I could get so in depth with it and then just zoom out, say, but yes, that's a song. Take it to the rehearsal space once we could safely all get together. And then that was the final filter. It was like, you could think we had a cool song worked out, but we knew the moment we started playing a riff together, if it was perfect or if it needed to be tweaked or too fast, too slow, does it need a swing feel? Because that human element is essential. There's no way we could write an album only using Guitar Pro, go record it, and feel about it the way we do with Deceiver. It's got to still go through the sort of collective filter of hearing it and just letting all of those cliches, letting the vibe sit with you and knowing how it feels, man, and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. How about the bass? Do you guys do you do bass on Guitar Pro as well?
Yeah. And originally we weren't sure what was going to happen with tracking bass on the album, so it was a matter of, I guess there were two things. There was the compositional dimension as well, where it's like, if I'm in here structuring riffs and stuff, let's see what the bass can do, to still be a bass guitar and not try to, overthink it. We're not bringing Alex Webster in to play on the album or anything, but, what are some places the bass can go? And then when I decided that I was going to play bass, because I already knew how to play the songs and I'd literally been writing these bass lines the whole time, I had this, sort of starting place to take everything, so that when I went into the studio, Dave Otero, our producer, he and I sat down and we went song by song, part by part, and figured out, because admittedly, as a guitarist who likes to solo, there may have been some initial ideas that were a little bit over the top. And Dave would stop me and say, look, stop. You're not a prog band. Like, the bass does what it does in Khemmis. It glues things. Like, yes, let's have it do some stuff it hasn't done before. But if it's not combining what is happening with the guitars and the drums, if it's just doing its own thing, then, it's undermining the kind of ethos of the band, and it's taking away from the music. And I wound up having a lot of fun tracking the bass. I've never recorded bass on an album. And the things I had to worry about are not things I have to worry about on guitar. Like, string noise is such a problem on bass, especially distorted bass. And when we play guitar, because we have that sort of doomy and or classic metal influence, we will shake notes sour on purpose. But, on bass, unless that's exactly what the guitars are doing, the bass has to be spot on, because there is nothing that is more unsettling than hearing a bass that's slightly out of tune or has misfretted something. And so the sort of looseness and vibe that I'm used to being able to embrace when I'm especially tracking rhythms, I had to play very mechanically, as a bass player. This has to be on, the timing has to be on. Also, look, as guitar players, we can get away with a looseness in timing a lot of the time that turns out bass players can't. And so it was a lot of oh, okay, can you actually turn the metronome up for me? I need to make sure that I'm really locking this in. But at the same time, there's an immediacy of what's happening on the bass where you hit that low note, especially when it's a big, slow riff, you hit that low A sharp, and the bass was going through, what all did we have? We had Neural DSP's Parallax going. We also had a Sansamp into an SVT Classic into an Ampeg 810. And then I think we also had an Orange 8200 into something, maybe another Ampeg 810. So like there was a lot of bass. And so when I had that low note, that was just, I felt it in my guts.
Yeah.
My toes were wiggling. It was so awesome. And so, that sort of immediate visceral satisfaction. I was like, okay, I think I get it. I don't want to start playing bass in a band. Guitar makes more sense to me. But I have this newfound appreciation for what it takes to be even just like a solid bass player, much less a really good bass player. Because I am not a really good bass player, and I'm fine with that. I will settle for, solid every day of the week.
Yeah. Yeah, because the album I'm doing at the moment, I'm playing bass as well. But guitar is my main instrument. But yeah, like you're saying, you really do have to not think like a guitarist. You got to think like a bass player and really lock in with that bass drum.
That's it. Yeah. At times, I almost think more like a drummer, which, like I've gotten, I think, pretty good at programming drums for demos. Like I have been playing music with Zach long enough that I can do a pretty good Zach impression when I'm programming drums. Yeah. But it's different when you're sitting there and you're, putting MIDI hits on a grid versus a stringed instrument in your hands. Like I understand rhythmic subdivision, in my brain in a way that sometimes my hands don't necessarily agree with.
Yeah, but that sounds great though. Like you did really well with both.
Thank you so much. I really like the tone that we got. Was one thing I really pushed for. I said, it's got to be big and fat and low end heavy, but like I want some of that grind. I want some of that, sort of. I don't even know if it's like a classic metal sounding. I almost associate it more like modern rock and metal. Yeah. But for I don't want it to be like clangy like I'm playing slap bass. But for instance, I think Red Fang has Aaron from Red Fang's bass tone is phenomenal, and the way that it sits in the mix and that it has that sort of upper mid range grind that's fuzzy and gives a texture to what's going on instead of just being low end. Mm-hmm. I was like, I want whatever the appropriate Khemmis version of that is in our stuff. I don't want it to just be low end. I wanted to add this like 3-dimensionality to the tone. And so when we got done blending all of these, tones to get the overall bass sound, I was just absolutely over the moon. Yeah. And I really love the way it sits in the mix.
Yeah, for sure. Now I must ask you, because I'm at the stage now where we're doing the double guitar tracks. So how many guitar tracks did you do of the rhythms? Like did you do like 5, 6?
Yeah, so what's interesting is we didn't quad track most of the album. There's a left and right rhythm on everything. And then there's a few places where we did, when you say quad track, I think people think about the sort of like Metallica approach where it's all about getting the fattest, tightest thing. And when we added that second layer of rhythms, it wasn't about getting a fatter, tighter sound. The orange amps we use Rock Reverb 100s. Yeah. They are very mid-range focused in a way. They're like, if mids are the appropriate, part of the sonic spectrum for guitars, then orange are the creme de la creme of that, because they don't have a super extended, sort of sub bass range, and they don't really have a lot of information above like 12K, 13K, something like that. And that's cool. That's always been our sound. But we're like, for some of these parts, we want to add this other layer. And what we thought we wanted to do was add a layer with a Boss HM2 and have just like more of a texture layer than anything. And we spent a couple hours trying out. We had a vintage Boss, made in Japan HM2. We had the Behringer version. We have my Dunwich. I've got a Dunwich custom HM2 with a 4-band EQ. Something else. I think we had 5 HM2 variants, and we didn't use any of them. What we wound up using was a parametric EQ from this German boutique manufacturer called Lichtlerm. And I don't even think the guy makes pedals anymore. I think he's working with some other company now, but he was making pedals that were all named after, what is it called? His Dark Materials, is that it? Yeah. It's like a fantasy series.
Oh, right.
And he had made some overdrives and some like a noise gate and like a chorus pedal, but he made this really wild parametric EQ that every band had something like 20 dB of gain or cut on it. And so we dialed in roughly the EQ shape of what an HM2 does with that weird sort of double peaked high mid thing and then the elevated low mids. And we ran it into a PRS Archon, which is like, it's a high gain amp, but it's like a pretty smooth amp. But that EQ into that turned out to be the most ungodly, like unwieldy sound. And we were like, this is perfect, because if you look at it on a visual EQ and then you look at the orange tone, the two sit together beautifully. The orange like fills out the mid-range in that, unruly, call it fake HM2 tone. Yeah. And so we added that on the sort of like slow Death Doom part in Shroud of Lethe. It happens right before the blast beats in a Vernal Gate. A couple other places just like here and there for texture. But again, like because of the vibe we wanted on the album, even with the, tighter metal parts and the more sort of technically inclined parts, I won't say we'll never be a quad track everything band, but a combination of the vibe and also just the fatness of those orange amps, just one rhythm left and right was all we needed. Yeah. Part of it too, it helps that like we don't use the exact same tone. So like we tracked using the same head and the same cab. We used my Magical Orange 412 that we've used on every Khemmis album. There's just no other cab that we found that sounds quite like it. It's got V30s and WGS ET65s, which I think are maybe greenback variants. Not variants, like clones, I suppose, in an X pattern. And it's just got this fatness and this massive low end. But between our different guitars, different pickups, and different overdrives in front, I use our Arnaud Krakowka plumes, and Phil uses an exotic EP booster. It shapes enough of a sort of tonal difference up front that it gives you a fuller stereo image. Again, it's like to juxtapose it against Metallica, where like James was like, I'm coming to use the same guitar and the same amp. And, there are stories of him tracking so tightly that it would collapse into mono. I don't want to worry about that. I don't want to worry about trying to get it that perfect. And I think that would be a bad fit for what this band is. There's always got to be that human element that even if we could get 4 rhythm tracks lined up on the grid like that, it would feel wrong. It would feel disingenuous.
That's why I love hearing things about this where you go back and listen to the album again, you get a whole new appreciation of it.
So here's a cool little thing you can listen for. In Shroud of Lethe, when it gets to that big Death Doom part, everything drops out. This is after the second chorus, I guess. Yep. And it's just my guitar, and it's just playing that really slow riff. Right before the drums hit, there's this just brutal squelch of feedback, and that was spur of the moment. So I was tracking, I had done my rhythms on that, and then I was like, all right, I'm going to do my ugly layer, and then Phil's going to do his. And the amp was in standby. We just weren't really paying attention. Dave started the take. We're hearing the metronome, and then Phil and I both look over and realize the amp's in standby. So he flips it on, and because it had been on standby, I didn't have my volume rolled down or anything. So the way that feedback explodes in is just because we were like, oh crap, and then flipped on the amp, and it is just
oh wow.
And it's just this really happy accident that then we had to figure out okay, we have to figure out how to duplicate that when Phil's tracking in a second. Okay, where did he? And it was like, can we make lightning strike twice? But I love those little moments, and that kind of stuff happened because this time around we had the time and resources to be sort of more exploratory in the studio. Not like we've been under the gun in the past per se, but there was still a sense of okay, we know how many days we have, and then that's it. Yeah. And here we were we have all of this time blacked out. we know that if we rush through it, it would only take this amount of time. Let's let these songs continue to grow and continue to live. And Dave put it, I think, quite succinctly. He said, in the past, we've treated this like it's the heavy metal factory and we're coming in to stamp out songs. Now we're still very much in the creative process, and these songs aren't done until they are literally getting pressed. And it was a very satisfying way to approach it.
Yeah, fantastic.
Yeah, I mean, I could sit here and talk for another hour. Like, I love nerding out about this stuff.
Yeah.
I don't get to do it. And anytime I talk about it, when I'm outside of my office, my wife is like, please, she's like, I love you and I love your music. I don't care what kind of pickups you put in the guitar today. Like, that's fair. That's absolutely fair.
That's it. Yeah. No, hopefully, we'll get to catch up again anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. I would very much enjoy that. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me, Adam. I really appreciate it. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. And hopefully, good luck with the album too.
Right on. Thank you so much.
No worries.
Take care.
See you later. Bye-bye.